Welcome back to the channel, Hobby One Kenobi here. Today we're kicking off the build of the Hasegawa 1/48 scale A-4E Skyhawk. This classic kit has been around for decades and it's one I've always had a great time working on. While Hobby Boss has released updated versions of this aircraft, I wanted to revisit this Hasegawa kit and give it another go. We start, as always, by carefully clipping the parts from the sprue, cleaning them up, and prepping the cockpit for paint. I airbrush the interior color, which is a mix of Tamiya paints. Once the paint is dry, I move on to hand painting the cockpit control panels in black. A quick tip here, when painting, it's crucial to keep your paint thin. This gives you much more control over how the paint moves. You might think that thicker paint would work better, but that's just not the case. Thin layers give you more precision and make any touch-ups easier. If the lines aren't perfect, or if the brush slips, I'll just go back over the area with the cockpit color to correct it. Going back and forth between the two colors helps me achieve nice, sharp lines. Once the panels are painted, I turn my attention to the control panel itself. Using dry brushing, I apply white to the dials in both white and light gray to highlight the switches on the side control panels. Next, I spray a gloss coat to seal everything in place before applying a wash. The wash is a mixture of my go-to Winsor & Newton Artist oils, thinned with terpenoid to keep the pigments flowing smoothly. While the wash dries, I turn my focus to the ejection seat. I use Vallejo model color paints to bring out the various colors of the seat. This is a kit part, but the buckles are scratch built using Annie's buckle sets and some Tamiya tape. Once it's all done, the seat gets a gloss coat and a wash just like the cockpit. After everything's had time to dry, I use a Q-tip and a soft brush to remove any excess wash, giving the parts a nice, subtle, weathered effect. Now that the wash has dried, I apply a flat coat to all the parts. Then I dry brush some lighter colors over the raised areas of the side panels to really bring out the detail. With the cockpit details looking good, I move on to the engine fan blades. After they're painted, I glue them into place in the fuselage using Tamiya extra thin cement. At the same time, I attach the cockpit tub to the fuselage, carefully joining the two halves of the aircraft. Once the fuselage is sealed up, I start working on seam removal. On the real aircraft, there's a very faint seam at the edge of the engine takes. However, it's not in the same spot as the seam left by the intake parts in this kit. To fix this, I press the parts together firmly with Tamiya extra thin to melt the plastic and force the plastic into the seam. Another incorrect seam is found at the tail of the aircraft. For this one, I fill the seam with CA glue, then use a sharp knife blade to carefully scrape away the excess. After that, I smooth it all out with sanding sticks. Inside the engine nozzle, I fill a seam with Tamiya gray putty and sand it down. While working on the engine intakes, I noticed a small notch from poor fitting parts. To correct this, I build up the missing area using CA glue and an accelerator, known as zip kicker. I prefer transferring the zip kicker into a glass bottle and applying it drop by drop from a toothpick. This gives me much more control and saves the product from being wasted. Once the excess glue is sanded down, I airbrush the intake interiors white and glue them to the fuselage. Today we're doing a deeper dive into the build, finishing up some final construction details, and then it's time for paint. So let's get right into it. First up, let's tackle the horizontal stabilizers. Now, Hasegawa molded the elevators a bit thick, and I wanted to make sure they look more realistic. Since not much detail would be lost, I decided to thin them down. The process begins by carefully scraping plastic from the trailing edge of the elevators. A crucial tip here is to keep the blade as flat as possible. This avoids beveling the edges and gives the piece a smooth and realistic shape. After scraping, I used sanding sticks to refine the edges. Now the horizontal stabilizers look much more realistic. I glued in the clear cover for the leading edge 3-light external display. This part should sit flush with the wing, but the piece from Hasegawa didn't fit perfectly, so I had to use a little CA glue to fill in the gaps. Once the glue set, I sanded the piece down with sandpaper and sanding sticks. Then I polished it up with a Dremel tool fitted with a polishing wheel to achieve a nice clear finish. I also thinned down the attachment points for the heads-up display and mounted the control cover in place, securing it with Tamiya extra thin cement. For the canopy and the windshield, I masked them off both inside and out using Tamiya tape. Then I airbrushed NATO black on the exposed areas. One fun detail I like to add to these models is to create the oxygen hose for the cockpit. I make it by coiling thin wire around another piece of wire, which eventually will be painted and positioned over one of the side consoles. Once everything was dry, I carefully removed the masking tape and cleaned up any imperfections with a toothpick. This step really brings everything together, ensuring that the clear parts have a crisp, clean finish. Now it's time for some airbrushing. First, I sprayed the white on the underside and several upper areas of the wings. Using my GSI Krios airbrush, I started with the tricky angles first, making sure to hit those hard-to-reach areas. Then I worked my way out to the flatter surfaces. This technique helps ensure thorough coverage. When spraying white, I always try to lay it down in multiple coats. Even if the base color is light gray, you still want that solid, crisp finish that only multiple layers can provide. Next, I masked off the hinges on all the flaps. Now you could go the easy route and just mask straight across the flaps themselves, spray the next color, and then brush paint each hinge separately. But I decided to do it the long way, masking off each hinge with small rectangular pieces of Tamiya tape. It was a tedious task, but the results are worth it. With the white areas masked off, I moved on to airbrushing the gray. The transition between the white and gray should be feathered, so I made sure to freehand the airbrush to achieve that nice soft edge. I also masked off and painted the red interior sections of the leading edge flaps. With everything masked and ready to go, I sprayed the red, then carefully removed the tape. Only a few small spots had overspray, nothing a little touch-up can't fix. Now let me take a moment to talk about the blue areas of the Skyhawk. I'm representing an aircraft from VA-163, the same squadron flown by Senator John McCain. I loved the vibrant blue and red patterns on these Skyhawks. However, I did run into a couple of issues. The blue lines for the vertical stabilizer rudder came as individual decals, which isn't the issue, but I wasn't sure that they would fit properly. Additionally, the shade of blue didn't match the historical photos I found. So I decided to mix up a custom blue using Tamiya paints. Instead of using decals, I decided to airbrush all the blue areas and mask them off carefully. I did end up having a lot of problems with the decals, but I will save that for the next and final video. To mask off the white lines, I cut thin strips of Tamiya tape and set them in place with tweezers and my trusty optical visor. The tedious process was totally worth it to avoid those off-color decals. The triangular emblem took some time, but I'm happy with the results. And here we are so far. For this build, I'm using decals from a company called Uprise. After applying them, the instructions recommend pressing each decal into place for several seconds. Once dry, you cover the decal with a piece of tape and rip it off quickly, which is supposed to remove the transparent film and leave just the decal. This process is fine unless the decal needs to go over erased details. If that's the case, the decal doesn't settle into the crevices even after extensive burnishing. This will likely be my first and last time using these decals. Because the decal didn't settle properly between the ridges, I had to brush paint the missing areas. Once the decals were fully dried, I gave them another gloss coat in preparation for the oil wash. For the wash, I used Winsor & Newton Artist Oils thinned with turpenoid. Once I found the right gray tone, I applied the wash over the entire model, focusing of course on the panel lines and crevices. I really enjoy this part of the process. It's relaxing and the results are always satisfying. Just be sure to let the wash dry completely before you start moving it around. If it still has a shine, it's likely still wet. Once dry, I removed the wash using a Q-tip and a soft brush, wiping perpendicular to the panel line so as not to pull the wash out. Next, I gave the model a flat coat and removed the masks. Then I masked off the arrestor hook area to paint the black and white stripes. While Hasegawa provides a decal for this, I do prefer to paint these stripes myself. I cut small strips of Tamiya tape and wrap them evenly, then spray the exposed sections with Tamiya black. After it all dried, I carefully removed the tape. Next, I removed the masking from the canopy and windscreen. I touched up the areas under the windscreen and along the side rails of the cockpit. Another weathering technique I like is softening the color of the insignia and symbols on the aircraft. I again use artist oils and mix them to match the vehicle's gray color. Then apply a small layer of paint to the insignia and blend it in. This reduces the stark contrast and gives the model a more lived-in look. It's also a great way to fix any silvering on the decals or touch up any other flaws in the paint. In some of my reference photos for the A4, I started to notice dark streaks running along the fuselage, starting at the top and extending down along the side. I recreated this effect using artist oils, I used this same oil mixture to weather the fuel tanks and add the typical streaks found on the Skyhawk. And with that, the model is finished. I had a great time revisiting this build. I absolutely love the A4 and the variety of colors and insignia you can find on these aircraft, from the Marine and Navy jets to the many different aggressor camouflage schemes out there. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.